Let's take a look at minor project 1. The objective is to develop and write 10 research questions, each with 2 hypotheses. And you can look at the Cosby and Bates book for more definitions about research, alternative hypotheses, and null hypotheses. In general, we do not use null hypotheses with our field of studies. In the end, you'll have 10 research questions and 20 hypotheses on a leadership research topic of your choice. So you can just cite those theories and concepts. We don't need you to actually write a literature review, which you will do in your major project of this class. To get you started, I want you to think about different workplace outcomes or issues you might have in your workplace that you would want to help solve. For example, if you look on the right side of this table, you'll see employee engagement, job satisfaction, and organizational commitment. Those are 3 of the top desired workplace outcomes right now in companies. Or maybe you're looking to help your company get ready for an organizational change, or evaluate the quality of life of your employees, or perhaps you have an issue with absenteeism, turnover, burnout. Any of those types of outcomes or issues that you're having, we could do a study on. Now, there's tons more, so this is just a sample to get you thinking. But if you look at those items on the right, hopefully you'll start to think about, okay, yep, I see this happening in the workplace, or I see this happening in this organization, and maybe I can do a research study to help them on that. Now, you can also think about possible solutions. So this is very off the cuff, but you could look at, well, could the fruit of the spirit help improve employee engagement? And those variables, each one of these items on this page are actually instruments that can help you measure these items. So you could measure the 9 fruits of the spirit and see how they relate to or even predict job satisfaction, employee engagement, organizational commitment, and so on. You could look at perhaps people that are more committed to their religion are more satisfied at work, or they're more engaged or more committed to their organization. We could look at different leadership styles like servant, spiritual, authentic, and ethical to see perhaps people that are more ethical with their leadership, maybe they have a more professional quality of life, and you could look at those too. But hopefully what you're seeing here is that we have an independent variable and a dependent variable. So we're looking at least 2 instruments as we start our research project. Now, to do this through the Regent Library, and this is how I want you to start your project. Now that you've contemplated a few ideas of possible topics, I want you to think about, all right, let's go into the Regent Library and look at empirical articles and actually see what they recommend for future research. Okay, so let's say we picked servant leadership as something that we're interested in. And maybe we want to know what research has been done recently on servant leadership and what have other scholars recommended that we do for future research. So I'm looking at quantitative because this is a quantitative class. And I also want to use the word future, we'll say future research. And then we'll look at the last 12 months. Depending on your topic, you could look at the last 12 months or 3 months to try and find the most recent articles. Some of your studies may not have as much research, so you may need to go to the past 3 years. But we'll just start with the last 12 months here. And we want scholarly and peer-reviewed articles. Okay, so in this, we see on the top an article about work engagement, service leadership, so not quite servant leadership, but something close. And let's take a look at it. All right, so most of your empirical articles will be set up the same. Your abstract is usually between 150 and 200 words, and this basically tells you in a nutshell what the whole article is about. So you can read this and decide if you want to take the time to read the rest of the article. Some of the words that pop out to me here include work engagement, transformational leadership, follower work engagement. And so this is enough for me to think, yep, maybe this is, at least we're in the right wheelhouse. Maybe this is something that's of interest. So to make this short and sweet, I want to see, well, do they have recommendations for future research? And as we go through here, I can see that, yep, they're here saying, given the importance of motivational processes, there is a scope for future research to investigate job meaningfulness and psychological empowerment. Okay, so these sound like very specific variables that we could go find an instrument to measure. Now we'll use this here in a bit because we want this exact sentence as part of our research project. And this will be more important in the major project, but basically what we're doing here is now we're going to be able to say you're answering a call by the authors of this article to do this specific research that they're telling you to do. And that extends the field of research. So now what we want to do is look at how can we find these instruments for job meaningfulness and psychological empowerment. Well, we can go back over here and we'll just look at job meaningfulness. All right, and let's also tell it that we want quantitative. That should narrow our scope. We don't want to restrict it to an age limit because we're just looking for an instrument. Actually, I think I'll even say scale here because we're looking for an instrument or a questionnaire. And here we see the job enrichment scale, the psychological meaningfulness scale, the turnover intention scale. This looks like a good place to start. And we will then get into this. And it's talking about the psychological meaningfulness scale. Now, the more that you read in here, you would find out that, yep, this seems reasonable to me. So I'm actually going to copy that because they're just using the scales. I don't want to go off this article. I want to get back to the original instrument. So I'm going to go back here and put in the psychological meaningfulness scale. And we should find out who the author was. In this case, it was Spreitzer. So Spreitzer in 95. Now we can look for it, go to our advanced, tell it we want an author named Spreitzer. And this looks like the development article where Gretchen Spreitzer is introducing this new instrument. So as we bring this up, I like to download the PDFs. It gives you a chance to kind of find things a little bit easier. But in this, what we need to do now is figure out, okay, we have an instrument. What does it measure and what can we do with it? Now, if you read again, you could read through their abstract right here. This small section is the abstract. And it's letting us know, okay, this is how they developed it and how they deemed it valid and reliable, which this would be a good article then for minor project 2, because that's what we need to know is who developed an instrument, why did they develop, and how did they deem it valid and reliable. As we go through here, what we're looking for are the subscales. And in this case, here are the subscales. They're measuring meaning, competence, self-determination, and impact. Okay, so this is helpful because we will need to know this for our research question and hypotheses. Okay, so I've started a Word document, and you'll see that I have my new instrument here, the Psychological Meaningfulness Scale by Spreitzer, and this is what it's measuring. I also picked the Servant Leadership Assessment Index, and this is who developed the scale and what it measures. Now, with research question 1, and you can word these a lot of different ways, but basically we want to, again, say something that's broad enough that we have room to measure our variables, but something that's narrow enough that we know what it is we're measuring. So in this case, I'm saying, is servant leadership related to psychological meaningfulness? And that gives you a broad enough way to say it without getting into the nitty-gritty. So I'm saying servant leadership as my independent variable positively relates to meaning. And you'll notice here I'm using the full servant leadership scale. I'm not breaking it down into the subscales of agapeo love, altruism, empowerment. I'll do that in my second research question to provide an example. You can do it either way. But if we just say servant leadership as a whole, it means we're using the full instrument. But here I'm saying meaning is my dependent variable. So I'm picking that up specifically right here as a subscale from the psychological meaningfulness scale. And we want to use the wording verbatim if possible. So you'll see competence here relates to competence there. Self-determination here relates to self-determination up here. And what that does, it makes a very scientific approach to doing your research. So with our hypotheses, we're saying servant leadership positively relates to meaning. And I like to label mine with independent variables and dependent variables to help you see which is which. Basically, our desired outcome is meaning. That's our dependent variable. It's the outcome that we want, and we're thinking that servant leadership can help us get there. Also notice here that research question 1, all the hypotheses are also labeled hypothesis 1. I just labeled them as A, B, and C to differentiate each one. Now, using the same 2 instruments, we could write a second research question here. Does servant leadership impact psychological meaningfulness? With this one, we're breaking it down differently. I'm going to use the subscales of the Servant Leadership Assessment Index. So agapeo love there goes here. Altruism from up here goes down here. And I'm using the full psychological meaningfulness scale as our dependent variable. So basically then our hypothesis of agapeo love significantly predicts psychological meaningfulness gives us that view that we're looking at love and it predicting psychological meaningfulness. Now, notice the wording too that we have up here, positively relates, and down here, significantly predicts. So I'll show you some more examples later, but basically these connector phrases are scientific enough that we're saying, this is what I expect to happen. Either it's relating, it can be positive or negative, or it's predicting. Okay, if we go back to our table that I showed you earlier with desired workplace outcomes and possible solutions, then one of them was employee engagement using the Fruit of the Spirit scale. And we can see on this slide here, I put my research question down as, do the fruit of the Spirit have an impact on employee engagement? And with this, I want to know, do those 9 fruits, can they actually have an impact? Can they predict employee engagement? The 2 instruments that I've chosen are the Fruit of the Spirit scale by Bacarnia et al. And the Employee Engagement Scale by Wiley. Notice again, research question 1 has the hypothesis 1, A through I. And we have the independent variable and the dependent variable label. As a second example, will burnout prompt intention to quit? So again, these are specific questionnaires that you can use. We're using the Maslach burnout inventory and the turnover intention scale. The Maslach burnout inventory measures emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. Those are our independent variables. And the turnover intention scale just simply measures turnover intention. Again, notice research question 2 has your hypothesis to A, B, and C. Now, if we go back and we look again at the Regent Library, I found this article called Toward an Understanding of When and Why Servant Leadership Accounts for Employee Extra Role Behavior. And you'll notice at the top here, they suggest another question to be addressed by future research. To what extent is servant leadership driven by personality, situational factors, or both? Well, that is a question that we can answer using a research question. So to do this, I found 2 instruments, the Servant Leadership Assessment Index and the NEO Personality Inventory. Both of these will be used on the next page to answer this question. Notice here the subscales: agapeo love, altruism, empowerment, humility, serving, trust, and vision, as well as neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. Those are personality factors. So taking that, we're actually having the research question, to what extent is servant leadership driven by personality? If we go back and look, to what extent is servant leadership driven by personality? I'm not answering about situational factors with this one. I'm breaking it down to only look at personality. My 5 variables on the NEO Personality Inventory are my independent variable. And then the servant leadership is the dependent variable. So neuroticism negatively correlates with servant leadership. That's my hypothesis. Extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, I think they all might positively correlate to servant leadership. Again, notice research question 3 has hypothesis 3A through E. And these are the 2 instruments that we're using, the NEO Personality Inventory and the Servant Leadership Assessment Index. Now maybe you're thinking, okay, this is making sense, but where do I find all these instruments? Well, I've shown you how to use the Regent Library to find instruments. You can pull up different articles and see what instruments they're using. You might look to see what future research they think you should do with specific variables and find a questionnaire that matches that variable. There are also other places you can look. If you go to mindgarden.com on the internet, you can Google Mind Garden. There's plenty of resources out there for you. At mindgarden.com, you can take a look at their products, and they're listed by authors, by product name, all sorts of ways, but you just poke around and see. For example, if I wanted to use the Authentic Leadership Questionnaire, they have it out here with 2, either by itself or with the Multi-Factor Leadership Questionnaire, but let's just go into this one. It shows you who developed it, Avolio, Gardner, and Wolumba. It shows you what it's measuring: self-awareness, transparency, ethical, moral, and balanced processing. These would be your subscales. This would also be the wording that you'd use for your variables. And you could go down here and look at product specs. And this gives you more information. It's 16 items long. What it measures, again, is down here. And what you'll notice with this, however, is that you have to pay to use this instrument. So for the sake of this class, you don't need to buy anything. What we're doing here is just doing the research to see, what does this instrument do? So if you were interested in this, you could do some more research in the Regent Library and actually find the original article that introduces the development of this instrument or this questionnaire, and that would be good enough. A couple of other resources that you have access to would be the Taking the Measure of Workbook and the Handbook of Tests and Measures in Education and Social Sciences. Both books actually are fairly expensive, so again, I wouldn't buy them for this class. But this shows you can get them on Amazon. Basically, Taking the Measure of Work is by Dale Fields. He has been an instructor here at Regent University. It's a fantastic little book that lets you see what all sorts of instruments that are out there. And you'll see here he's got job satisfaction, job stress. He has them organized by topic. So there's all sorts of instruments for job stress, all sorts of instruments for job roles, for organizational justice, and so on. Now, one good thing about this without buying the book is you can get the names of the instrument here, and then again go out to the Regent Library and do your research to see what are they measuring and who developed it, why did they develop it, and so on. The other book that I have listed is this Handbook of Tests and Measures in Education. Again, it's a little bit of a pricey book, but it gives you a chance to just see what's out there. They have 120 tests and surveys in this book. So maybe later in your program or even after graduation, these two might be good resources for you to have at that point in time. For now, though, I don't think it's necessary to purchase either. I just want you to know about them. All right, and as we close out this video, I want to give you an example of what Minor Project 1 could look like. This is really all that you need, is a document listing which instruments you've used, what their subscales are, and then your hypotheses and research questions. Again, you need 10 research questions and 20 hypotheses. You'll notice that in this one, there are way more hypotheses than needed. And that's fine if you want to go to that extent. Basically, what they've done is used all of the subscales. So you see the subscale here for ethical leadership: fairness, integrity, ethical guidance, people orientation, power sharing, role clarification, and concern for sustainability. They match, the wording matches verbatim with our independent variable. And then the subscale for satisfaction with life, actually this one just says life satisfaction. Frankly, I would change this to say satisfaction with life, and that way you're using again those words verbatim. So satisfaction with life, and then I would change that down here too to say satisfaction with life with all of your dependent variables, just to make sure that they are verbatim. Because what happens if you're not this specific, this is a scientific process, so we want to make sure that it's as specific as possible. It's not that you won't see that out there, but from a quality control perspective, I like to have things matching and so on. So we'll get those all synced up. Anyway, as you look on down, then you see now research question 2. Again, with every research question, you need 2 instruments. So instrument number 1, instrument number 2. Then we have the hypotheses, and you see those all listed down there as well. All right, as we wrap this up, again, you need 10 total research questions. Here you have research question 3, research question 4, and so on. You just want to make sure you have 10 research questions, at least 20 hypotheses, and that is it for Minor Project 1.